Okay, so as discussed, we're going to be covering coding certain infectious diseases and parasitic diseases. This includes such things as COVID, HIV, AIDS, and others. A lot of new codes on this, so we'll look at some key terms, and hopefully as you answer the questions that appear on screen, this will enhance your understanding of this. As in other chapters, there are official guidelines that you see in the code books, and you can see this in Appendix F in your online appendices for those of you who have gotten that. All the codes for the infectious diseases start with A or B, and they run in the range from A00 to B99. So if you're looking at any other codes, any other letters, or tempted to put any other letters, you're in the wrong place. And again, we'll talk about things like HIV/AIDS. And in addition to COVID and some of the other things like Zika that we're very interested in, we're also interested in diseases that are resistant to antibiotics, the methicillin-resistant staph. We'll also cover things like sepsis and when does sepsis become severe sepsis and septic shock. So let's take a look at HIV/AIDS. HIV is not AIDS. HIV is the human immunodeficiency virus. We only code confirmed cases of AIDS. And unless there is incomplete documentation or something like that, it's AIDS when the provider says it's AIDS. This includes such things as a patient being admitted for an HIV-related condition, patient with HIV disease that's admitted for something that's unrelated, whether it's patient is newly diagnosed. And there are codes that also cover asymptomatic HIV, inconclusive HIV, and HIV that's in pregnancy, childbirth, puerperium, and others. We also have special codes for encounters for testing with HIV. And these are covered in the guidelines that appear in the very beginning of your textbook and also in the chapter covering coding infectious diseases. Some important things out of the guidelines. When you have infectious diseases that are causing a disease that is related to another chapter, such as things like strep, staph, that causes some other manifestation, you use the additional code from chapter 1, meaning chapter 1 of the code book, to identify the organism. And these are mentioned, otherwise it's non-specific, as we'll see. Anytime we have an infection that's resistant to antibiotics, we're going to use a code from the category Z16. When we say code category, we're talking about the first 3 characters of a code. So a Z16 code is the category that covers anything that is resistant to antimicrobial drugs. And again, we'll get into sepsis, severe sepsis, what sepsis is, newborn sepsis. All these other things are covered in the guidelines. And topics included in the guidelines, again, the MRSA that we've talked about, combination codes, general spoiler alert, if we have a combination code, we're going to use that instead of 2 codes, right? If there is a combination code. And again, your textbook has Appendix G, which is useful for the microorganisms, for those of you who might be a little rusty on that. And again, you'll see throughout this chapter the notes in the tabular. So this includes diseases generally recognized as communicable and transmissible, additional codes. So it'll say use additional codes to identify resistance to antimicrobial drugs. There excludes one and excludes two. Excludes one meaning mutually exclusive. So if you have a localized infection, for instance, you can't have it with a generalized infection, right? It's mutually exclusive. Excludes two means not normally found there, but can be coded if the documentation supports it. And again, it all revolves around the documentation. As you look at these notes to code, look and see if you have a body site, an organism, the etiology of the disease, and the severity of the disease. For instance, is it acute or chronic? Combination codes, what we mean by combination codes, they identify both the condition and the organism that causes it. So in this example here, we have B30.1, conjunctivitis due to adenovirus. So in other words, this code B30 covers both the conjunctivitis and the microorganism. In this case, this is the code that we would use. We would do multiple coding to describe the etiology and the manifestation when directed to do so. And while the alphabetic index may give us the code, we need to validate in the tabular to make sure we're capturing the correct code. Now we get into what I used to call the sepsis trilogy. We have sepsis, severe sepsis, and septic shock. Sepsis is caused by the body's immune response to an infection. And as part of this immune response, your immune system releases chemicals, cytokines, and some of these other things into the bloodstream to fight the infection. And so this is a systematic result. With this, it impairs the blood flow. And with impaired blood flow, we have damage to vital organs, kidneys, brain, what have you. And the one thing about sepsis is we don't have sepsis without a reason. We don't just have it. We have it as a result of something else, an infection, normally. Severe sepsis is an infection with an associated organ dysfunction. So in other words, we don't just have an infection in the blood and inflammation, we have an organ being infected. And sometimes it could be just one organ, sometimes it could be more than one. Septic shock occurs in extreme cases when, as a result of this severe sepsis, the patient develops low blood pressure and goes into heart failure. And then this is a cascading effect that causes the failure of the lungs, kidneys, and others. We'll continue our discussion on sepsis shortly in the next set of video lectures. That's all I have. Bye now.